Welcome to another Tomkat quiz. I hope you're not getting fed up of them. This one's a picture quiz, so let's get on with it. Picture number 1. This is what you find in the loft when you're servicing an inset live fuel effect gas fire. So, would you class it as not to current standards? Would you class it as at risk? Would you class it as ID? Or is it ID and RIDDOR? So this would be classed as at risk, and it's covered in IGEM G11 5.9, existing open chimney flue system installation with one or more defects likely to affect the safe and effective performance of the chimney flue system. And it does say, if you look down there, incorrect use of a chimney flue material, e.g. exposed chimney flue liner, is at risk. Picture number 2. So you're carrying out a tightness test where the meter is in a meter box outside and you find the gas pipe coming out this way. So is it not to current standards? Is it at risk? Is it ID? Or is it ID and RIDDOR? Now this pipe sticking through the top of the meter box is actually classed as at risk. Now you're only supposed to bring a pipe out of a meter box from actually out of the bottom of the meter box where the knockouts are. Now in IGEM G11 2.8 is probably the closest we've got for this. So pathway for gas to enter the property from the meter box, e.g. damaged box or installation pipe work within the meter box, entering the property without a sleeve, or the sleeve is not sealed, and that is at risk. That's about the closest we're going to get for this, but it's at risk. Again, when carrying out a tightness test, you find this gas meter installed underneath this consumer unit. So, is this not to current standards? Is it at risk? Is it ID? Or is it even ID and RIDDOR? Now in this situation, because there's no damage to the gas meter or the pipework or the regulator or the actual consumer unit itself, it would be classed as not to current standards. Picture number 4. Now, when carrying out a landlord's report, you remove the oven from underneath the hob, and this is how you find the gas pipe piped to the hob. So is it not to current standards? Is it at risk? Is it ID? Or is it even ID and RIDDOR? Now in this situation, this will be classed as ID and RIDDOR, and if we look at the unsafe situations procedure IGEM G11 3.2, pipework and or fittings inappropriate material for purpose, e.g. plastic water pipe or hose pipe, would be deemed ID. But again, because somebody's actually done this, it would be ID and RIDDOR reportable. Number 5 is a little video. So, you've just installed a boiler. Now under Appendix 5 of the Gas Safe Installation and Use Regulations, you need to visually inspect appliances you've encountered, and this is what you've encountered. So, is it not to current standards? Is it at risk? Is it ID? And is it ID and RIDDOR? Now in this situation, this would just be ID. If we look at the unsafe situations procedure 7.7, flueless or fluid appliance with visual signs of incomplete combustion at the main burner and or within the heat exchanger, a flueless one is ID. A fluid one is at risk. Now picture number 6. Let's try this one. So on a landlord's report, you find a cooker is installed with a cooker hose. Like this, it passed the tightness test and there's no signs of damage on the cooker hose. So, is it not to current standards? Is it at risk? Is it ID? Or is it ID and RIDDOR? Now in this situation, this cooker hose would be classed as not to current standards because there's no damage or risk to life or property. Now let's try question number 7. Again, you go to service the boiler, and this is what you find in the kitchen while you're servicing the boiler. So, is this hob not to current standards? Is it at risk? Is it ID? Or is it even ID and RIDDOR? That is the question. Now on this one, the obvious one is the unstable gas appliance, which is actually classed as at risk. So under IGM G11, that's 7.12, appliance found to be insecure and or not stable. So that is a potentially unsafe, that is at risk. But did you notice there's a gas tap missing? So this could potentially make it ID. So in the unsafe situations procedure, IGM G11, 7.4, appliance, gas controls and safety devices that are affecting the safe operation of the appliance, which are inoperative, failing to danger, or are disabled. So I don't think anybody would have a go at you if you ID'd this hob. But hang on a minute, what about ID and RIDDOR? Because somebody has actually installed this in a dodgy location, knowing that it's unsafe, knowing that the gas tap is not working, and it's in a pretty poor state. So, it's ID and RIDDOR. Let's try number 8. So you card to this boiler to service it, because it's a year old, and this is the flue you find. So, would you class this flue as not to current standards? Would you class the flue as at risk? Would you class the flue as ID? Or would you class this flue as ID and RIDDOR? Now hopefully you said ID and RIDDOR because this flue is wrong in so many levels. Just amazing. Question 9 and another flue. So this is a Worcester flue sticking out the wall. When testing, no products of combustion were entering the building at all. What are you going to classify this as? Is it not to current standards? Is it at risk? Is it ID? Or is it ID and RIDDOR? Now, because there's no products of combustion entering the property, this situation will be classed as at risk. For further information on the correct sealing of flues, you can look at GasSafe's Technical Bulletin 152. Now, picture number 10. So you've been asked by a builder to remove this boiler and install a new one, but not until the walls have been built and the roof has been put on the extension. So, how are you going to classify this boiler as you find it? Is it not to current standards? Is it at risk? Are you going to ID it? Or are you brave enough to ID and RIDDOR the builder? Now I couldn't argue with you if you said this boiler is ID and RIDDOR. If you actually read the yellow section at the top of every page of IGM G11, it says, when considering whether an unsafe situation is RIDDOR reportable, the following criteria need to be met. Number 1. The situation is a result of design, construction, manner of installation, modification, or incorrect servicing of a fitting, often referred to as poor workmanship design, and is dangerous to such an extent it is likely to or has caused death, unconsciousness, or taking to hospital of a person. I think this probably covers all that. So I definitely would be ID and RIDOR in this situation. Now try number 11. Again, this is a Worcester flu. So, how are you classifying this? Not to current standards, at risk, ID, or ID and RIDOR. It's up to you. Now the closest we've got in iGEM G11 is at risk, 6.6 room sealed chimney flue system which are damaged, insecure, inadequately supported and or using incorrect jointing methods to such an extent that it may cause it to become unsafe and or a breach of integrity is likely. So sticking a waste fitting on the end to make a terminal probably comes under that one, I think. What about number 12? After carrying out a tightness test, you find the regulator is leaking on the top. So is it not to current standards? Is it at risk? Is it ID? Or is it ID and RIDOR? Well, because it's failed a tightness test, it makes it ID. 1.2 on iGEM G11, failing a tightness test, is ID. Now let's try number 13. You go to service this boiler and you find the flue integrity test point cap is missing. So is it not to current standards? Is it at risk? Is it ID? Or is it ID and RIDOR? So this is actually at risk and it's covered in iGEM G11 7.2. Number 2, air inlet sample point cap missing, damaged, no evidence of leakings of products of combustion. That would be classed as at risk. Obviously, if you did have more than 10 parts per million of CO coming into the room, that would be deemed immediately dangerous. And if this cap was missing on the flue gas products test point, then that would be automatically ID, whether you've got 10 parts per million of CO or you haven't. And finally, picture number 14, because you can't end on 13, can you? So think this flueless water heater is actually installed correctly. So, are you going to class it as not to current standards? At risk? ID? Or are you going to ID and RIDOR it? So a sneaky one to finish with. And did you notice this flueless water heater hasn't got the 5-minute warning label? So that would be classed as at risk. iGEM G11 8.4, flueless water heating appliance without 5-minute warning label for usage and time is classed as at risk. So, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.